If you believe some places hold memories, then this story will haunt you long after it ends. Subscribe if you're ready to dive in. I wasn't planning to stay the night. That place, the lake house, it was meant to be a pit stop. A 2-day chore on my list, just long enough to take inventory, call the realtor, maybe snap a few photos of the property before it got bulldozed or flipped into some Airbnb rental. I brought a sleeping bag, sure, but only because motels in that part of Maine are overpriced and smell like ashtrays soaked in pine sol. But now I wonder if I ever really had a choice. The moment I stepped onto the old, warped deck and looked out over the water, I felt a pressure in my chest. Not sadness, not nostalgia, not even fear that it was something else. Like the air around me thickened, like the lake had exhaled, and I'd unknowingly stepped into its breath that I stood there a long time. Just staring at the water, it looked the same. That's what scared me most. I hadn't been back since I was 12. That summer, God, it's like a bruise on my memory. Faded, discolored, tender when pressed. And it had been pressed lately, more than usual. Ever since Uncle Ray died, and I found out he left me the property in his will. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. The man was always strange, standoffish. One of those adults who didn't speak to kids so much as watch them. But he was family, and in the summer of 2001, my parents shipped me off to stay with him for 2 months while they worked through what I now know was the early stages of their divorce. I barely remembered that summer. Only fragments. The way the wood steps always creaked in the same spot. The box fan humming in the bedroom window. The sound of loons calling across the lake like they were laughing at something only they understood. And Daniel. He was the only kid around my age on that stretch of dirt road. Lived 2 cabins down, came by every day on a rusted bike with a bent front wheel. Always carried a red backpack, always barefoot. Even on gravel. I hadn't thought about him in years, hadn't needed to, until I opened the lakehouse door last week and stepped into that stale, dust-caked silence. That's when I remembered his laugh. Not a memory, exactly. Just the echo of it, the kind of thing you feel behind your ribs. The house was in better shape than I expected. Uncle Ray kept to himself, but he wasn't dirty. Most of the furniture was covered in sheets. A few dead flies near the windows. A newspaper on the kitchen table dated August 3rd, 2001. The same summer I'd stayed here. The same week Daniel disappeared. No one had mentioned that when the lawyer called. Hell, I didn't remember it myself. Not until I saw his name scribbled in the margin of an old board game box tucked under the couch. Property of Daniel M. Written in red marker, blocky and crooked like a kid's. I picked up the box, turned it over in my hands. The top was warped with moisture. The pieces inside rattled. I must have sat there for 15 minutes, just holding that damn thing, trying to force the memory to come back. Something about a fight. A dare. A game near the dock. But nothing would solidify. It was like there was a wall in my brain, and behind it, something was scratching. That night, I slept on the couch in the main room. I left the windows open, hoping the sound of the lake would lull me to sleep. It didn't. Instead, I kept hearing it. The soft slap of water against the dock. The dull thud of footsteps on wood. And once, maybe just once, a voice. I told myself it was the wind, or a raccoon, or my own nerves playing tricks. But around 2 a.m., I heard something that made my blood go cold. The creak of the back door opening. I shot up, heart thudding, as adjusting to the dark. The house was still, too still. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the distant call of loons and the sound of water lapping at the shore. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and crept to the back door. It was wide open. I stood there, scanning the darkness, waiting for anything to move. But there was only the lake, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And then I saw it. Something bobbed near the edge of the dock. Not a boat, not driftwood. It was a red backpack. I didn't go down to the water that night. I closed the door, locked it, and stayed awake until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself outside. I told myself it had to be trash, a trick of the light, some teenager's prank. But when I reached the dock, the backpack was gone. Only wet footprints remained, small, barefoot, leading up to the edge of the dock, and then vanishing. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? The local sheriff? The lawyer? My parents, who could barely remember what year I was sent here, let alone who Daniel was. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the lake. I checked the neighbor cabins, empty. Most had been abandoned years ago, boards nailed over the windows. I circled back to the house, my nerves frayed, my head pounding. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked behind the water heater in the crawl space, a leather journal, moldy and soft to the touch. The first page was blank. The second had only 4 words, written in the same sharp handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and old grocery lists. It remembers. So do I. The rest was filled with entries. Disjointed. Rambling. Uncle Ray's handwriting growing more erratic with each page that he wrote about dreams. Wet footprints. Whispers at night. About a boy who wouldn't stay buried. About the lake. Uncle Ray's journal didn't read like a diary. It read like a confession, written by someone trying to bleed guilt out through paper. Some entries were barely legible. Scratched out, rewritten. Others had dark stains that looked too old to be ink. It was never about the boy. Not really. It's what we let it do. What we told ourselves was mercy. I still hear him sometimes. Laughing. Splashing. Then silence. Always silence. I buried the backpack under the dock. I thought that would be enough. But this place doesn't forget. God help you if you try to. One page had only a drawing. A shape, roughly circular, with long arms and something that looked like an eye in the middle, staring up. Beneath it, he'd written in all caps, "It's not water under there." Not really. I dropped the journal and backed away, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just guilt. This was obsession, madness. And yet, it felt familiar, like something inside me had been screaming all along, and I'd just now started to hear it. That afternoon, I went to the dock that I didn't wanna. Everything in me begged to stay inside, but my feet carried me there anyway. That I sat on the edge and let my legs dangle just above the surface. The lake was still, too still, not even a ripple, despite the breeze. That I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was 12 again. Daniel and I were playing treasure hunt. That's what we called it. A game we made up where one of us would hide something near the lake and the other would have to find it before sunset. That day, I was the seeker. Daniel had his red backpack slung over one shoulder. He ran off into the woods, whooping like a loon, vanishing between the trees. I never found the backpack. I waited hours by the dock. Then the sun dipped behind the hills. Then the moon came up. Daniel never came back. That's where the memory used to end. But now, sitting on that dock, staring into the lake's glassy black eye, I remembered more. I remembered finding the backpack, buried under wet leaves behind the boathouse. I remembered opening it and seeing something that made my stomach turn. Not blood, not a body. A rock, heavy, wet, wrapped in a blue t-shirt, one of Uncle Ray's, and a note, just 3 words, scribbled in pencil. We made it stop. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the water. My head spun. My vision blurred. Somewhere, beneath the surface, I thought I saw something shift, like a ripple moving the wrong way, like something big, slow, and waiting. That night, I read the journal cover to cover. Ray wrote about a pact, about silence, about how Daniel had gotten too close to something near the lake, something old, something not meant for children to touch. He never said exactly what it was, only that he and the others tried to make it right, that the backpack and the rock were an offering. A bargain that I didn't know who the others were, but the last few pages were addressed to me by name. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. The lake will be waiting for you now. You were young. We thought you'd forget. But the lake doesn't forget. And you were there. It never wanted Daniel. It wanted someone to remember. It chose you. That's when the voices started. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard the whispering, not in the walls, not outside, from inside my head, but it didn't sound like my thoughts. It sounded like him, Daniel, whispers of games, of secrets, of cold water and something pulling him down, laughter mixed with choking, pleas for help cut off by silence that I curled up on the couch, clutching the journal to my chest like it could protect me. Outside, the loons were silent. The lake was waiting. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed my bag, tossed it into the trunk, started the car, but when I pulled onto the gravel road leading away from the house, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. Water. The road was flooded. Not just a puddle, knee-deep water stretching for yards. I checked my phone. No signal. I turned around. Tried the other way. Same thing. It was impossible. The weather had been dry all week, but the lake had grown, swelled, reached its fingers into the woods and blocked the only exits. I was trapped. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching the dock, watching the water rise inch by inch. Something bobbed near the shore again. This time it wasn't the backpack. It was a shoe, small, muddy, torn at the sole. I recognized it instantly. I had buried that shoe 23 years ago. I don't know how much time passed after that. I stopped eating. The fridge had gone warm. The generator gave out. The lights flickered once, then died completely. Time started to bleed. I'd blink and the sun was down. Blink again and it was day. But the lake never changed. It watched me. Waited. Reflected things that weren't there. Once, I saw myself standing on the dock, but I wasn't there. Another time, I saw Daniel's face in the water, staring up at me. When I finally gave in and walked to the dock again, it felt like my legs were moving on their own. The lake had grown again. The water lapped at the steps of the house now. I stood at the end of the dock and whispered his name, and he answered. I whispered his name, Daniel. The sound barely left my lips. Still, it carried, like the lake had been waiting for it. A breeze stirred. Cold, damp, not from the wind, but from below. The water near the end of the dock began to ripple, circular waves spreading out from a single point. Then, a voice, not loud, not angry, just sad. You left me. I spun around. No one. No footprints, just water, and the echo of that voice inside my skull. The dock groaned under my weight as I backed away, but I couldn't move fast. Something about the voice had paralyzed me, not my body. But my will. I stood there as the ripples grew. The moon broke through the clouds for a brief second, just long enough to reveal the shape in the water. A figure, small, childlike, pale arms just below the surface, swaying like reeds, the eyes too open, too wide, not accusing, just disappointed. You didn't try to stop them. And that's when the last memory came back. Not a whisper, not a dream. It was twilight. I was 12. Daniel had dared me to follow him into the woods. Said he found something weird near the shoreline. I remember thinking he was lying, trying to spook me. But I went anyway. He led me to a circle of stones near the water's edge. There was something in the center, a hole. Deep, black, covered by tangled vines and damp moss. He said he heard something inside. Said it sounded like breathing. That's when Uncle Ray appeared. So did the others, 3 men I didn't recognize, but who all looked at us with flat, unreadable faces. Ray smiled, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're too young. Go back to the house." I did. I walked away. I heard Daniel scream behind me. Only once. I never told anyone. They said he ran away. The police searched the woods, the lake, found nothing. They closed the case. Everyone moved on, except me. Now, the lake had brought it all back. It remembered everything, and it wanted me to remember too. That night, a storm rolled in, but the thunder was distant. The lightning only flashed over the lake, never touching the forest. I stayed inside with the journal. It had begun to warp from dampness. Pages stuck together. Some were smudged beyond reading, but the last entry stood out, fresh ink. Though Ray had died over a year ago, you have to make it right. It never wanted a sacrifice. That was us. We told ourselves a story to explain it. All it ever wanted was memory. The power was long gone. The air was thick and heavy. The lake had risen to the porch. Water pooled at the doorway. I sat and waited. For what? I didn't know. But the longer I waited, the louder the water sounded. Not splashing, not lapping, whispering, dozens of voices now. Not just Daniel's. Some called names I didn't know. Others simply repeated the same words. We remember. We remember. We remember. I opened the door. Water flooded in, up to my ankles. I stepped out and saw them. Shapes beneath the surface, not bodies, reflections. Faces of those who had been forgotten. Faces of those we had chosen not to remember. Daniel was at the front. He stood waist deep in the lake, smiling that same crooked smile he had at 12. He raised one hand, not in threat. I took a step toward him, then another. The water was freezing. It bit into my skin, up my legs, into my chest. But I didn't stop. Behind me, the house groaned. It wasn't built for water. Neither was I, but the lake didn't care. It had waited long enough. When I reached him, Daniel didn't speak. He just looked at me with wide, curious eyes. Then he reached out and touched my chest. Everything around us went black. I saw it all at once. The rituals, the offerings, the lies passed down generation after generation. Tales of keeping the lake satisfied, of making it sleep. But the lake was never hungry. It was awake. It waited. And it remembered everyone we chose to forget, especially me. I sank without struggle. The lake accepted me like a long-lost part of itself. The last thing I felt was Daniel's hand in mine. Not angry, not punishing, just holding on like we were kids again. Then silence. They found my car first, parked in the gravel lot off Route 9, its windows fogged, keys still in the ignition. Then they found the house or what was left of it. The porch had collapsed. Water covered most of the first floor. Furniture floated in stagnant pools, and the wallpaper had peeled like shedding skin. But there was no sign of me. No footprints, no drag marks. Just a soaked leather journal wedged beneath a broken floorboard. Inside, they found my notes. Not all legible, some were blurred into. Bleeding ink stains, as though the water had swallowed my words before the paper did. But the last few pages survived, scrawled, frantic handwriting, streaks of mud and lake grime across the lines. I remember now that I was a coward that I left him there. Told myself it wasn't my fault. Told myself it was just a story to forget. But the lake never forgot that IT kept the truth, that IT waited until I was ready to see it. This place is haunted, not by ghosts, but by remembrance. The kind you bury in the silence of your own mind. The kind that only grows louder with time. That I don't know if I'm writing this for you or for me. But if you find this, stay away. That don't go to the water. Don't listen to its voice. That IT doesn't forgive. IT only remembers. The journal was turned over to local authorities. No foul play was determined. Search parties scoured the lake for days. Boats, divers, dogs, nothing. Eventually, they called it an unexplained disappearance. Another adult who wandered into the woods and never came out. There was no public outcry. No front page headlines. The lake has claimed others before. It'll claim others again. But those who live near it know better than to ask too many questions. They keep their stories quiet. They pretend not to notice when the surface moves without wind. They pretend not to hear the names whispered by the shore on windless nights. Sometimes, when the moon hangs low and orange above the treetops, locals say they see two shapes out on the lake point, one small, one tall, just standing there, side by side, as if looking back at the shoreline. They never come closer. They never wave. They just stand there, still, patient, remembering. If you made it this far, the lake hasn't forgotten you either. Tell me below, what do you think the lake really was? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time, don't listen when the water whispers your name.